to keep you waiting, but thank you, Nahanda, for our beautiful music. We look forward to hearing you again later. Thank you. Can you hear me properly? Yeah, great. Thank you, everyone, for coming along this evening. I know it's a bit cold and wet and not, the ideal conditions to be coming out to a meeting like this, so really appreciate you making the effort. This really is an important event for the Birmingham branch. We're launching our election campaign for May 2022. It's also almost 2 years to the day since the founding of the Workers' Party. The founding meeting was held not far from here in West Brom. And I think, we can all be really proud of the enormous strides that the party has taken in such a short time under incredibly difficult circumstances. So there's a lot of faces here from the party, so very happy to see you all. For those who don't know, I'm Lauren. I'm the branch secretary for the Birmingham section of the Workers' Party of Britain. Come in, sit down. So I'm the branch secretary for Birmingham section of the Workers' Party. Really excited and energised to see so many new faces here this evening. There's never been a more important time to challenge the Labor Party's domination of Birmingham. The Labor Party, they may like to tell you and pretend that they're the party of the working class, but I'm sure after what you'll hear tonight, you'll know for sure that it couldn't be further from the truth. Just to talk about Birmingham for a moment, under Labor in this city, Birmingham has seen a massive reduction in social services and programs. They've reduced the number of council staff by over 50%. This includes binmen, gardeners, contractors, electricians, etc. All the kind of people who sort of keep the city functioning, looking clean and tidy. All the while they're increasing our council tax by the maximum rate. Further still, Labor have sold off thousands of council houses, overseen a homelessness program that was deemed unlawful by the High Court because of the dangerous conditions that they were putting residents in. We have record high waiting lists for housing, and as you'll hear from our speaker Ruben, those who are lucky enough to secure housing are often neglected and left to live in basically slum-like conditions, which is, not acceptable in modern Britain. Labor have also implemented some truly anti-worker policies here in Birmingham, including the Clean Air Zone, which is basically a charge of £8 to drive into the city centre if you're unable to afford an electric vehicle, and at £22,000 a pop who can. It's effectively a tax on the working people of this city, something that we want to abolish. They put in an LTN in Kings Heath, which is apparently supposed to reduce pollution, reduce congestion. It's a low traffic neighbourhood, but we know, I see a few people in the audience from Kings Heath, they know it's anything but the case. We've seen increased congestion, increased pollution, small businesses left to die. And all of this was pushed through under emergency COVID legislation, so they didn't even have to consult the residents. Talk about democracy. Under Labor, Birmingham has one of the highest child poverty rates in the country, between 35 to 40%, if you can believe it. This means over a third of all families in the city have to make choices between feeding their children, turning the heating on, sending them to school, etc. This is one of many reasons why we're campaigning for free bus travel for children under 16. At the moment, some families are having to choose between feeding their children, paying bus fares for them to get to school. Did you know that transport for West Midlands, they have a budget of around £900 million, and the privatised bus services mostly run by National Express, they bring in around £30 million in profit per year. Our campaign for free bus travel for children would cost £7 million, which is really like chump change for these guys. And it will have an immediate effect on the lives of all working families of Birmingham. And London has it, so, why can't we? But what does Labor do? They brought in new bylaws that effectively criminalises kids who skip fares on the bus. If you're caught by a policeman skipping a fare, you can go to court. Rather than, providing free transport for kids to get to school, they want to punish them. This is not acceptable. Now these examples that I've given, do they sound like the actions of a party that represents the working class?
No.
I don't think so, no. It's 2021. This council, Birmingham City Council, the biggest council in Europe, is sitting on financial reserves of over £500 million. The people of Birmingham, I think you'll all agree, deserve much, much better than this. You know, this is the second biggest city in one of the richest countries on earth. This city was at the heart of the Industrial Revolution, and it's home to so many amazing inventions and technological advancements over the last 200 years, from the personal computer to, even more importantly, the electric kettle. And what do we have to show for it? We have historic buildings, torn down, left to deteriorate and sold to the highest bidder. We have streets full of rubbish, constant tax increases, growing issues with crime and drugs, and a council that could not care less. I say it's time for change. I hope that you will all agree. But what sort of change do we want for this city? Well, you're here tonight, the Workers' Party. We want free bus travel for children and cheap travel for working age adults. We want to get rid of the clean air zone, get rid of the LTN and all the other road closures that make it more difficult for working people to get around the city, and a focus on better public transport. We want clean and beautiful streets that the people of the city can be proud of. We want an end to the HMO free-for-all, where family homes are sold off, where tenants are pushed in and basically exploited by landlords, often at the cost of the taxpayer. And we want an end to the privatisation of housing and for council to rebuild the 50,000 homes that are needed to house all the people in Birmingham. But lastly, we want a party to be elected that represents the working class. We want an end to the corruption and an end to the dodgy deals that favour big business over normal people like us. So I hope that you will agree, and hopefully we can win your vote for the council elections of Birmingham 2022. Many inspiring speakers this evening, but to start off, I want to introduce Ruben Lawrence, who's the Community Engagement Officer for the Birmingham branch, former soldier in the military, now studying to be a chemical engineer, and incredibly passionate about building a better world and a better city for the people of Birmingham. So please welcome Ruben.
Tonight. I'll just be speaking to you a little bit about our work on the ground in the community in Highgate and Horsley in Birmingham, the things we've seen, the things we've experienced, and all of it comes from the residents of Birmingham. It's not just from us. So, to start with, the British Labour Party has been known as the only party to represent the interests of the British public. They are elected time and again, but on false promises. And our votes, mine included in the past, are always cast in the hopes that they will fulfil those promises. Now, if we look at Birmingham City Council, they're ruled by the Labour Party, majority of councillors and members of Parliament, and in particular, the councillors themselves, not even going up to the parliamentary level, the councillors have been accused by residents of corruption. Now, when you look at the city of Birmingham itself, just step outside of the city centre, it's totally visible. The effects of corruption on the city, on the residents, are totally visible. Many areas outside of the city centre are entirely run down, plagued by crime, as mentioned already. Funds that are meant to improve communities of working people and their children is instead flowing into the pockets of Labour Party councillors themselves. And all of this has been going on at a time of severe austerity and need, more than a decade of austerity. Now, this is, of course, my opinion, but this deliberate and criminal neglect has impacted neighbourhoods in a very visible and significant way. All you have to do is walk 5 minutes from here to see the tower blocks in Highgate, you know, the vermin that crawl in the walls of these tower blocks, the pile-ups of rubbish and the rats that kids are walking in the roads to avoid. Residents, when we knock the doors of residents and we survey them, they tell us that they are being refused repairs, being housed in apartments that we've been invited into that are unfit to be lived in. And again, the number of rats, not only in the streets, but in these properties themselves, are so thick. And this is no word of a lie. Children are jumping into roads to avoid these rats of these rubbish pile-ups. One resident in particular, Abdul, who lives in Highgate, he lives in a 2-bedroom flat with his wife and 5 children. So already there's an issue of overcrowding. And we see this every other door that I've knocked. There's an issue of overcrowding. And it's not a recent issue. It's been this way for a long time for a lot of people. He tells me that his boiler hasn't worked for 3 years. You know, British winters, especially in a tower block on the 15th floor, can be quite harsh. So you've got no hot water running through your pipes. Your radiators aren't working. Abdul works part-time. Of course, he's responsible for his family, but thanks to the neglect, the deliberate neglect of the council, of the Labour Party council in Birmingham, he's fighting a losing battle. Every year, he's having to buy and replace electric heaters just to get through the winter, just so his children can be warm in the winter. This money coming out of his own pockets, you know, heating, it's a basic necessity in this country, and the council can't provide it. 3 years, they can't repair his boiler. The cost of running these electric heaters, I know myself, maybe some of you in the audience know too, it's expensive, you know, it's not trivial, especially if you're working part-time or minimum wage. It is not trivial. It has a massive effect on you, you know. Sometimes so much that you have to choose between heating and eating, as they call it. It's not an exaggeration, it's a reality for people. Repairs that need doing in his flats. So fed up over the years asking the council to try and repair, you know, it's your duty. Come and repair this for me, come and repair that for me. They won't do it. They refuse. They say, oh, we've got no money. Yet, as mentioned already, 500 million in their bank account. 500 million. They've got plenty of money. One of the richest councils in England. One of the richest councils in England. Why are they telling residents this? And it's not just Abdul. Many, many, many residents. Some residents have even been accused of creating the vermin problem in the first place, saying people are transporting cockroaches into flats. It's disgusting, you know? Disgusting the way they're treating people. Not treating them like humans. And this from a party that says they are the representative of the working class. What rubbish. Over the last 3 years, me and Abdul sat down in the office and we worked it out, how much extra, all these repairs, all these tins of paint from the damages and the repair that he has to do himself, the electric bills, the cost of the heaters and replacing them, £6,000 over 3 years, an extra £6,000 on top of his bills. You know, he's got to feed 5 children. He's got to pay his bills. He's got to pay his council tax. Why is he paying his council tax? Why? If they're not providing any services. Not only for his property, for the building, the tower block that he lives in, filthy, rat-infested, cockroaches, no security, no cameras, the front doors don't work, so you get all sorts of, unfortunately, homeless and drug abusers coming in and using the building, you know, to do what they do. Amongst children trying to get to school, amongst families, you know, it's not on. Yet the council still continues to do absolutely nothing. This is the Labour Party. This is what they represent. This is what you get when you vote for the Labour Party. How much longer do we need? They've existed for over a century. Have things got better under them? No. They've been in power in Birmingham. They've been in power in Birmingham for over a decade. Have things got better? No. They have not. Only worse. And their actions are criminal. Because when you go out into the communities, when you are invited into homes and you see the state, you see how the children suffer, you see how families suffer, it's criminal. And what do? They blame the Conservative Party. We all know what the Conservatives are, but the Conservatives aren't in power in Birmingham. It's the Labour Party. Can you imagine what they would be like if they got their hands on government again? Would they be any better than the Conservative Party? Or just a red shade of the Conservative Party? Don't be fooled by them. It's just an excuse so they can shirk their duties. It's just an excuse because their main motive is to represent big business and represent their own interests. They want to fill their own pockets. That's all it is about. And it's at the expense of your children's livelihood, your children's health and well-being. Community well-being is clearly suffering in Birmingham. Residents consistently exposed to all the things I've mentioned, and it's getting worse. Community services and support continually cut. Deteriorating health of the residents, cold and damp conditions, again, housing unfit to live in. Birmingham is a very, very beautiful and diverse community of people, all colours, all religions. We all face these issues together. The common thing is that the Labour Party aren't doing what they are supposed to do. They are not supporting us. Dereliction of duty, totally. All of us are left to face these conditions totally alone. But on the other hand, things are changing. The work being carried out by the Workers' Party activists, many of them Birmingham residents themselves, alongside the community residents, which is as it should be. We are holding regular community surgeries. We're using our headquarter office for that. We conduct interviews to give people a voice. Every single weekend without fail, we carry out resident surveys on the doorstep, thoroughly documenting all the conditions affecting communities. We are aiding everybody, as many people as possible, in their daily struggle. And through this struggle, together with residents, with Abdul, with anyone who wants to take advantage of what we can offer, we are learning that ultimately systemic change is needed. A new politics involving the community at every single step of the way. No gap between the Workers' Party and the politics and the residents and the community. There's no gap between what the residents face every day and what the Workers' Party does. If you want to know what this new system, the new politics, what we can offer the Workers' Party, if you want to know what that looks like, involve yourself in the work we carry out in Birmingham. Look at what we do in Birmingham. We want a system that involves totally and improves the lives of all working people and those not yet employed, because we believe every single person has the right to a decent job, a decent living, a clean and healthy environment for themselves and their children. Not just Edgbaston, where people have got the money, they live in beautiful areas. Somehow their streets are always cleaned by the council. You pay your council tax, you're entitled to that. You are human. I think the council haven't got that. I think they don't think you're human, but you are. You're entitled to exactly the same. Clean environment, services for your children, creches so that single mothers can go to work and have somewhere safe for their kids to be and spend their time. That is what we want to offer people in Birmingham and nationwide. This is our vision for a new Britain. But the first step in us getting there, especially in Birmingham, is to get rid of the corrupt Labour Party. We need to get rid of them once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. Very well said. I'm reminded myself of a resident who, I don't think is here, but Samira. She lives in Charbury Tower in the inner city, and she's been shafted from temporary accommodation to temporary accommodation because her flat was infested with cockroaches, and the city council's response was to send her to temporary accommodation that was also infested with cockroaches, and then they sent her to another one that was also infested with cockroaches, and basically she's been homeless for a couple of months because the council won't find suitable accommodation for her and her 2 young children. I mean, this is the level of sort of care that we're dealing with here. But we'll hear more about that later as well. Next, I want to introduce Chris Williamson, who I'm sure most of you will know. He's an ex-Labour MP for Derby and former City Council leader. Long-time friend and advocate of the Palestinian people, and founder of the Resist movement, which is, building a grassroots sort of movement across Britain. And I believe he's going to be talking to us about left unity and how we can sort of bring all of these different working class organisations together. Is that right, Chris? I hope I've got it right. Thank you.
I will touch on that. Can you hear me okay? A little bit. It's great to be here. I'm absolutely delighted to be sharing a platform with George this evening. However, I have received a bit of stick on social media. You may have seen it today. And I was reminded of what Tony Benn said when he was standing for the deputy leadership of the party in 1981. He said, "I don't care what they call me. They can call me a Marxist, they can call me a Jesuit, they can call me a flat earth and a Trotskyite, a vegetarian. I don't care what they call me. The reason they call us names is they dare not face our argument." And I think that's absolutely true, because the Workers' Party are actually putting an alternative narrative out there and showing up, frankly, the failings of the Labour Party here in Birmingham, but not just here in Birmingham, really right across the country. And it is a great privilege to be sharing a platform with George. And George does get a lot of unfair stick. I hope he doesn't mind me saying that. But let's just, before we get into the discussion about the local government campaign, talk a little about George's record. I mean, George has a record which is unparalleled. I mean, he was an ANC activist, an undercover ANC, African National Congress activist at the height of apartheid in South Africa. That's incredible. I think people know about George's unflinching solidarity with the Palestinian people and calling out the abuses of the Israeli state against the Palestinian people. He's also a great advocate, of course, of the Latin American struggles, a real expert on that, speaking out in support of the Cuban people, in support of the Venezuelan people, in support of the Bolivian people, the Chilean people, right across the continent of Africa. And again, it's been a privilege of mine to share a platform with George at the Latin American conference in London on several different occasions. That's a tremendous record. And of course, George has also done a lot, I think, to debunk the anti-China propaganda. Now, there are things wrong with China, of course, but they've made incredible advances. Virtually eliminated poverty in the country, certainly eliminated extreme poverty, had a fantastic record in addressing the climate crisis. Again, China gets a lot of stick, and some of it's legitimate. I mean, they are commissioning new coal-fired power stations, that's true, but they've done a tremendous amount of work in terms of developing renewable energy. They've replanted much of the Chinese mainland. I think something like 23% now of China is now forest. And they have a plan, I think, by 2030 to make 30%, to reforest, up to 30% of the landmass there will be forest. These are important things to be doing in terms of addressing the whole climate crisis. And so it's important, I think, that we set the record straight. And far too few people, it seems to me, prominent individuals in public life, are prepared to actually set the record straight. And George is one of those who's never been quite about George's record. Let's also acknowledge the fact that George has never been fearful about standing up for people who are under threat, who have been abused, and people like Julian Assange used his huge platform to speak out on in support of Julian Assange and to try and hold this country, this government's record in incarcerating Julian Assange is incredibly important, probably the world's most important journalist and truth teller. And George has used his platform to speak up for him, for Craig Murray, for me when I was under attack, when I was being subjected to appalling abuse and then suspended from the Labour Party. George again used his platform almost on a weekly basis on his platform on the Mother of All talk shows. And of course, spoke out very strongly in support of Jeremy Corbyn. And frankly, if Jeremy had listened to George's advice, Jeremy would now be in Downing Street. I would still be a Labour MP, and I'd like to think that George will be in the Labour fold, and we would be changing the country for the better. But sadly, it wasn't to be. But our role, our task, I think, your task, all of our tasks, is to create a confidence in the working class community in particular, because people feel that politics has passed them by, that it doesn't really work, it's pointless who you vote for, that they're all the same, and they're right to think that as far as the mainstream political parties are concerned. And I think it's our job, it's your job, to try and instill a sense of solidarity, of confidence, that by standing together we can make a difference, we can turn things around, we can change society, change it for the better, create a good society. And local government, as Ruben has very eloquently outlined, is a great place to start, because there is so much that local government can do. I remember the halcyon days of what we used to refer to as municipal socialism, just up the road from where I live. In Derby, the Claycross rent rebels in the early 1970s took on the Heath government when they were insisting that they should be massively increasing council house rents, and they refused to do that. But if you actually look at their record, Claycross Council's record wasn't just in terms of ensuring that rents were affordable, that they were kept low. They were doing amazing things and using their powers as a local authority to, for example, in 1970 ensure that pensioners living in the borough of Claycross got a free television licence. 20 or 30 years, I think it was, before it was brought in by, it has to be said, a Labour government. They were well ahead of their time. They found a way of continuing to provide when Margaret Thatcher, the milk snatcher, took away the milk from the kids. If I could say that as a vegan, I think I prefer being soy milk. But they found a way. They found a way, using innovative solutions, to find a way around the strictures that were being imposed upon them. And I recommend, if you get a chance, if you just, when you go home this evening or over the weekend, to just Google Claycross Council, Austin Mitchell, if you just put something like that in, because he did a wonderful documentary when he was, they were really highlighting the battle against the Ted Heath government at the time. And then they went into some of the detail about some of these other wonderful, innovative ideas that they were bringing to the fore at a local government level. And of course, those sorts of things are replicated really across the country. I'm sure everybody will remember the Greater London Council and some of the wonderful things that they did. Ted Knight, I had a privilege to meet him a few years before he died, who led Lambeth Council. Incredible work that they were doing. In my own local authority, Derbyshire County Council, before I was a councillor, I was very active in the local county Labour Party, led by a chap called David de Bookbinder. Again, they were doing some innovative, amazing things, using the powers available to them at a local level to actually make a difference for people on the ground. Because what's the point of having a platform if you're not going to use it? You might as well not be in power. Well, they're not really in power. They're in office, but not in power. All Labour is offering. And I was making this point when I was on the front bench for the Labour Party and when I was an MP, and it was one of the reasons why I stepped down from the front bench, because all we were offering, all the Labour Party was offering, was to manage the Tory cuts better than the Tories were. Well, that ain't no way of inspiring people. That's no platform at all. And I was putting forward a proposition, which I want to put to you tonight, for a redistributive council tax. We've heard about the use of reserves. £500 million in reserves in Birmingham. What on earth are they doing, sitting on that amount of reserves when they're making cuts? when they're seeing people living in appalling circumstances. It's an absolute scandal and outrage. Whatever colour, whatever stripe is in power, but for it to be of the Labour Party, for God's sake, it's absolutely outrageous. Of course they should be using their reserves. And I talked about David Bookbinder. David Bookbinder and the Labour group on Derbyshire County Council ran the authority for 7 or 8 years with no reserves. They used their reserves to try and protect the people that elected them to do precisely that. That's what they're there for, or what they should be there for. That's the point of getting power, isn't it? To try and make a difference for the people in the borough that has elected you. And that's what they should be doing. So I think certainly reserves should be the first port of call. But of course you can only spend reserves once. That's a fact. And so there are other mechanisms which I think need to be brought to bear. And this is why I stepped down from the front bench, because all I was arguing for was a redistributive council tax. Now that gives local authorities the ability to say, well, what we're going to do is we're going to ask the rich people in the borough, or the rich people in the city, to pay a lot more, because they can afford to do that. And the flip side of that is that we will freeze the council tax. And this is what I was arguing they should be doing, nobody ever took it up. Freeze or even reduce potentially, depending on how many properties you've got in the higher council tax bands. And then you have to go to a referendum. Ironically, this ability has been made possible by the Tories. I mean, it was Sir Eric Pickles, that great well-known socialist, rotund socialist of this parish. And he piloted through in 2012 the Local Government Finance Act, which enables local authorities to offer differential discounts. And so what I was arguing, therefore, when I was on the front bench, that this is what Labour councils should be doing, because we're offering nothing other than managing the Tory cuts better than the Tories will. And that ain't no way to go on, in my view. And I was told that eventually, even though I'd written an article for the Morning Star, it had been in Tribune, I'd spoken on platforms with shadow cabinet members, I'd raised it at something called the core group of Labour MPs, these were the MPs who didn't join in the coup against Jeremy Corbyn. And then suddenly, and we were talking to a number of authorities, a number of Labour groups who were looking seriously at potentially going down this track, suddenly it was seen as incredibly controversial. And there was an article in the Huff Post, and the front bench, the local government front bench said, oh no, we can't possibly do this, we can't be increasing council tax for people in that way. And yet when you explained it to people, when I spoke to journalists even about it, they said, well, this is Corbynomics, this is Corbynomics in action at a local level, isn't it? And I was then told by people in Jeremy's office that Jeremy's furious about this, he wants to see you. I went to see Jeremy. Of course, Jeremy Corbyn doesn't particularly get furious. It's a pity he doesn't get furious with some of the right-wingers in the Parliamentary Labour Party. But I explained it to him, and I made the point to Jeremy that, look, we're offering nothing, because Jeremy went through a long list of things that Labour were planning to do in government, like land value tax and things like that. And I said, it's all wonderful, Jeremy, but it's all jam tomorrow. You need a Labour government before we can do that, and I support those plans that you're putting forward. But what are we offering right now? What are we saying to people in these upcoming local elections in a few months' time, as it was then? What are we offering them? Nothing. And in the end, I decided to step down from the front bench and continue to make that argument. But not a solitary Labour group has taken this forward. And even the Labour group on the Local Government Association wrote round to every single Labour group leader in the country to say, the Williamson plan won't work. Well, there's no such thing as a Williamson plan, because there's 1,000,001 permutations of how you can apply that differential council tax proposition. We came up with an idea for how it might be implemented in Derby, which they didn't do, sadly. And then they applied that across the whole country and said, well, look, you could raise more finance, you could raise more money at a local level through the council tax cap, which has been set by the Secretary of State at the time, than this so-called Williamson plan. But what they didn't say is, of course, that would have hit everybody, because council tax is an incredibly regressive tax, because it hurts those people who can least able to afford it than it does those at the top, who are the wealthiest. And for anybody who was concerned about somebody who was asset rich but cash poor, if you say, well, we want to have a big increase in council tax, how are they, often they put forward a kind of stereotypical little old widow who has got this big house but is on a very restricted income. Well, you can have a much more generous council tax support scheme. In fact, you could use the additional council tax that you raised to provide a more generous council tax support scheme across the piece. Because don't forget what the Tories did some years ago. They scrapped the social fund, which was a massive cut compared to what previously went before it. It was a single payment scheme under the old supplementary benefit rules, where people who fell on difficult times and had an emergency, they could apply for a single payment, a cash grant sum, to buy a new cooker if it broke down, or some new furniture, whatever it was. That got scrapped and was replaced by the social fund. And very often people would end up having to get loans from the state. Well, even that's gone now, and it's been devolved down to local government, but without the resources to follow it. So you're in a situation now where some people who are on subsistence income are being expected to make a contribution to the council tax. Now, there is a hardship fund, but it's nowhere near enough to actually cover the shortfall for everybody who's in hardship. Well, you could use these reserves, you could use this redistributive council tax proposition to make sure that you protect all of those people as well. Now, of course, would have to go to a referendum, but that's a way, isn't it, of engaging with people in the local issues of the day, the local issues facing the local authority, and engaging people in local government decisions, and saying, well, where do you think we should be investing more? Should it be in social care or in leisure, or a combination of those things? Should it be in improving the street scene, or a combination of those things? But giving people the chance to have a say. And I think that's something that I hope that Workers' Party candidates, when they get elected, can put forward this idea and look at it and consult with people, because at the end of the day it has to be agreed by the public at large, but we should be having an interaction. It shouldn't be a situation where we just elect leaders and we send them off to the town hall or to Parliament and then forget about it, because they go off-piste. They become officered at a local government level, so it's the local government bureaucrats that are running the show. And in Parliament, we see the same. They get infected by the Westminster bubble. I mean, George would be well familiar with that. I mean, I hated the place. It never kind of affected me, but God knows why it does with some of them. They just sort of kind of lose the plot completely. So I think that's one area that we should be looking at, where we can build a partnership with people and look at making sure that we can use the reserves, and we can use the redistributive council tax idea to actually make a real positive difference on the ground. And the other thing I wanted to say before I sit down is in relation to housing. And ironically, yet again, it's the Tories that have made this possible. Now, there used to be a cap on something called the housing revenue account, which limited the amount of money that a local authority was able to borrow to invest in new housing. Now, I was chair of housing for a long time before I became the leader, and then obviously got elected to Parliament. And for all that time, much of that time, not all of it, but all of that time I was campaigning for the cap to be removed from the housing revenue account. But for much of that time, we were a Labour government. They wouldn't do it. And it's the Tories, the bloody Tories that have done it. It's unbelievable. So there's no impediment now on local authorities. Yeah, they argue, oh yes, but of course, the right to buy is still in place. But then the discounts for right to buy don't come in until 15 years. And then it starts as a process. Well, hopefully, I'd like to think that by that time we would have been able to address that and maybe got rid of the right to buy and replaced it with a different system. So there's no impediment now. And I think what we need to be doing is obviously not just getting people in and elected, etc., and making this case in the town hall. We need to be mobilising people on the ground. We need to be mobilising communities, working class communities, so that they're aware of the powers which are available to local government, which they're not using, because knowledge is power, isn't it? And if we can get a grassroots movement saying to the local authority, and hopefully it's a Workers' Party-led authority, so it won't be a problem, but let's assume it's not. But if we can build a movement where people are rising up and saying, we're not going to take this anymore. There's no excuse for people sleeping on the street. There's no excuse for people living in social accommodation. I'm not using the excuse that there are cuts, that there are limits on our ability to manoeuvre now, because there are no limits on their ability to manoeuvre. And they might say, well, we haven't got the workers, the skilled workers available to build the council houses. Well, recruit them then. So they should be able to be recruiting people. So, it's a win-win situation. You're addressing a social need. You're actually generating decent jobs for people as well, and training opportunities for young people. I mean, I was used to be hard to believe these soft hands used to lay bricks, but I trained as a bricklayer, And it's a decent, steady job. I mean, there are many other occupations, of course, in the building industry. So you're giving people secure, reasonably well-paid employment too. And you're providing a much lower cost alternative to the crappy private rented accommodation. Many people are trapped in private rented accommodation, paying ridiculously high rents because the private rented sector was deregulated by the Tory government in 1989, and George was an MP at the time, I believe, and I'm sure will remember the debate, and there was a lot of opposition to it from Labour MPs on the benches. Some really good speeches were made, but then you look at the 1992 manifesto, there was no commitment to actually regulate private rented accommodation. There was no commitment in the 1997 manifesto either, or the 2001, or the 2005, or the 2010, or the 2015, nothing. No respite for private rented accommodation tenants. No respite at all. The first respite that was made available in a manifesto from the Labour Party was in 2017 under Jeremy Corbyn. Now, it's all very well spouting off. Talk is cheap and it's important, of course. But if you can only talk the talk but don't walk the walk when you have the power to do something about it, well, that's not acceptable in my book. And the final thing I'll just say in relation to housing, so as well as building and as well as recruiting people and training them up, etc., and there may be a lag in terms of the ability to build the houses because there may not be the skilled workers because there hasn't been investment in training for many, many years. But because that cap has now been lifted from the housing revenue account, the local authority can just go out and buy properties on the open market. They can buy properties in the way in which they used to do in the 1970s under the municipalisation programme. Again, George was in local government, I don't know if he remembers, but that's what used to happen when I used to work for the local authority, Williamson. I was a maintenance bricklayer. I remember going to, maintain seated council estates. You'd often go and be pepper potted houses here, there and everywhere, and because the council had been acquiring them. So there's no excuse for the housing crisis. Local government has it within its power right now to do something about it. And we need to be making that argument, it seems to me. We need to be making that argument in the town hall. We need to be making that argument on the hustings and on the doorstep. But most of all, we need to be giving the wider general public the information, particularly in those working class communities, so that they can rise up and demand change. Because change won't come unless we mobilise and inspire a movement. Because nothing's ever been given from above, has it? It's always been fought for. We've always had to demand it and, use brute force, frankly, to get the sort of changes that have actually improved the quality of life of people. Many of those changes, of course, many of those reforms that were brought in have been scrapped over the intervening 40 years or so since Thatcher came in 1979, although the impetus for that was started when Dennis Healey went to the International Monetary Fund in 1976. That Labour government was the first monetarist, the first neoliberal government in reality. So I think what we are about is creating a dream. And making sure that we can fulfil that dream. People have dreams, don't they? People have dreams for their kids, a better life, a decent job, security, And it was Martin Luther King who once said that they can kill the dreamer, but they can't kill the dream. And whilst they might have killed the dreamer in the sense of they've destroyed the Corbyn project, and that was a dream for a lot of people, we're still here, aren't we? The Workers' Party has now been created. There are other movements which are emerging. And I think we need to find a way of pulling people together outside the Labour Party, maybe some who are still in the Labour Party, to realise that unless we stand together in solidarity, unless we build a mass movement, we are not going to make the changes which are desperately required in this country. Because look, the establishment are incredibly powerful. They've got loads of brass. That's why they're powerful. And I used to always say this to people on the doorstep. If ever they would say, it's migrants' fault. And I say, lift your eyes above the horizon, mate. It's not the migrants. You've got more in common. I remember saying this to a BNP supporter, believe it or not. You've got more in common with asylum seekers and the people at the top of the society. The big corporations, the establishment, the very self-same corporations that are behind the wars and the exploitation, which is forcing people to seek refuge in this country. Let's link arms in solidarity, stand together in solidarity and demand change. And when we do that, comrades, we are incredibly powerful, because together anything is possible.
Thank you so much, Chris. The main thing that I think stuck out for me from your speech is there is no impediment. There is nothing stopping the Labour Council here from implementing any of these policies, anything to improve the lives of working people. They just don't have the political will to do so, because they don't care, frankly. So next I wanted to invite Nasri to the stage. She's a Palestinian activist joining us all the way from Ramallah. He's going to talk briefly about life in Palestine, life under imperialism, and yeah, he's going to share some stories with us. Thank you.
Good evening, comrades. Good evening, everyone. I'm really honored to be here on the same platform with two legends, Chris Williamson and George Galloway, both who have fought for the Palestinian cause, not just for the love of the Palestinians, but obviously from the speeches we heard earlier, the love for justice, justice for the Palestinians, justice for the working class of Britain. I think this is where it all came from. They're motivated to fight for a moral fight for the justice of the deprived and for the people, or the oppressed people in the world, whether this is in the UK, in Europe, South America, or in West. Long-standing support with the Palestinian people. I know there has been many issues, and we heard in the news and what Jeremy Corbyn's have been through, same as Chris and George, about anti-Semitism. This is a pathetic thing, absolutely pathetic. What is anti-Semitism? When we talk about oppression in Palestine, it's a kind of oppression that it is hard to explain. It's a daily routine oppression. The Israeli occupation is not only fighting for land, as many people might think. They're fighting to dehumanize the Palestinian people. They have been doing so for decades. They are actually not recognizing us or the Palestinians as being human. They should not really exist. This is a very difficult battle with the Israelis. Dehumanizing, a war to dehumanize people across the world is one of the most difficult fight that you can put up against an Israeli oppression. The power they have, we recognize it. We recognize that Israel have wings. Here in the UK, in the US, in Europe. This is all to do with the capitalism itself. From the time of Rothschild and the World Bank, who control the world, control the interest, control organization and institutions across the world, whether that's in academic institutions, financial, or other political institutions, including the Labour Party, who have been infiltrated by Zionists to discredit anyone or any politician who would stand for the moral cause of the Palestinian people. Both George and Chris have stood for morality. That's what it's all about. It's not an agenda to support people against people, but there is a war here between evil and morals. And sometimes we have to take a stand, whether you want to be with morality and morals and moral causes, or you want to stand by evil. Both have chosen to stand by morality and morals. And that's why they are here tonight. They are standing by the morals of the fight of the working class, who have been deprived of their rights, deprived by the capital and the greed of capitalism within the UK society. And I think that's what it's all about. Here, you guys have to decide whether you want to stand up by those who fight for your rights, or those who want to deprive you of these rights or such rights. And there are no gray areas within this. The world is divided. It's divided between the people who have the power and the people who are subjected to all kinds of oppression. And I think we relate so much to the working class here in Britain, who have long suffered injustices, and since the miners, possibly in the 80s strikes, when they discredited all the unions and fought against the unions in the UK, to our present time, where we find that the Labour Party shifts from a party fighting for the working class to a party trying to imitate the Conservative Party in many ways.
Thank you so much. It's so important to be reminded that the struggle of the working class isn't just here in Britain. It's an international struggle, and that's why we say, you know, workers of the world unite. Next up, I want to welcome to the stage Eugene Egan. He's a local resident of Birmingham, a mental health worker, and also, luckily for us, a poet. He's going to be reciting one of his original works this evening. I hope you will enjoy. Thank you, Eugene.
I'm a poet, but I just penned a few words a few years ago. It was in response to the Gilets Jaunes protest in France. And I mentioned in the poem Manu, and just to clear up any misunderstanding, Manu is the nickname for President Macron. And the poem is called We Are Many, You Are Few. Pompous and arrogant like a squire, whilst your taxes fuels the fire, feathering your filthy nest, it's time to get out the best. We do not jest, there'll be no rest, while you rob the poor to fill your coffers with more. Let them eat cake, so said Antoinette. Ah, but now they've got the internet. Oh look, they're at it again. Have the plebs no culture or shame? Years of neoliberal violence met with bourgeois compliance, but now the people are on fire and your situation's looking dire. I understand your anger, says Macron, but this is not on. As the old lady is gassed and lies bleeding, a compliant media does his bidding. Perhaps my words hurt you. I do apologise, says Manu, as he tosses a bone to the peasants to avert the radical elements. Your Arab Spring is here, loud and clear for all to hear. Are you listening, Manu? We are many, you are few. So we don our yellow vest, up in arms we do protest. Are you listening, Manu? We are many, you are few. The proles are angry and the workers are hungry. Are you listening, Manu? We are many, you are few. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. Beautiful poem, and always good to have proper working class culture highlighted and centred at meetings like this. Now for another sort of cultural intermission. Welcome back Nahanda to the stage. Nahanda is, as I mentioned before to those who are here, a very outspoken women's rights activist. She's a local recording artist and singer-songwriter. We first got in contact with Nahanda after I think she met Ruben on the train, and she asked him straight away, do you know what a woman is? And luckily for her, he did. Nahanda's been very outspoken in fighting against this sort of identity politics trend, and which is really seeking to sort of overrun the rights of women. So yeah, very happy to have her here tonight to sing her song Woman.
Yes, I Am Woman this one is. This song is, you tell me, listen to the lyrics, but I've been told it's very, very controversial. In fact, I have been cancelled in apparently. So there's certain DJs in Birmingham who will not play my music. They will not touch anything that I'm to do with, even songs that I'm featured on, they will not play because of this song that I wrote, which is called I Am Woman, and I wrote it and dedicated it to J.K. Rowling, who is a woman who's using her voice at the moment to speak up. So yeah, this one's for J.K. Rowling. I feel like words aren't enough, but your silence is deafening, so I call your bluff. Your quietude is deadly, my words are a bomb. Your stillness is the detonator, my words are wrong, but I still speak them, you can tell me later. Cause I don't, quite frankly, give a damn. I'm woman, so take me as I am. And I'm handy with a pen, I'm handy with a pen, and I speak my words with truth so you could try to follow me. I'll tell you it's no use cause I can show you the way, but still you can't walk in my shoes and see my heart is pure, and so I've got nothing to lose. And I don't, quite frankly, give a damn. I'm woman, so take me as I am. Take me as I am. Shoo-doo-doo-dee-da-dee-da-da. La da da dee da da da. Yeah, I feel like words aren't enough, but your silence is deafening, so I call your bluff. Your quietude is deadly, my words are a bomb. Your stillness is the detonator, my words are wrong, but I still speak them, you can tell me later. Cause I don't, quite frankly, give a damn. I'm woman, so take me as I am. Take me as I am. Shoo-doo-doo-dee-da-dee-da-da. La-da-da-dee-da-da-da. Yeah, I feel like words aren't enough, but your silence is deafening, so I call your bluff. Your quietude is deadly, my words are a bomb. Your stillness is the detonator, my words are wrong, but I still speak them, you can tell me later. Cause I don't, quite frankly, give a damn. I'm woman, so take me as I am. Take me as I am. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's right. If anybody thinks that's controversial, if there was anything controversial about I Am Woman, but yeah, so people that have retweeted that, or anyone that's had anything to do with that song, have been dragged into a whole Twitter war about it. But I just think it's a lovely song about being a woman in today's world. So thank you so much for letting me join it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Nahanda. I hope that no one here will think that there's anything controversial in that song. If not, they can speak to us after. Our final speaker of the evening really needs no introduction from me, but I just want to welcome George Galloway to the microphone, our esteemed leader of the Workers' Party. Thank you so much for being here, George.
Thank you, Lauren, and my comrade Reuben, Chris Williamson, distinguished parliamentarian. I told you I would never leave you alone, and I kept that promise. And as I heard you speak there, I can see now why they really had to get rid of you. Because you represent, as your tie represents, a memory, a ghost from Labour's past. Someone who's seeking practical solutions to the problems of the working class. And that's the last thing that the Labour Party now, and indeed for a long time past, has been interested in doing. Nahanda, I don't know if there was anything controversial in your song, but frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. It was absolutely beautiful. Eugene, you are a poet. You just don't know it. And Comrade Barghouti from occupied Palestine, I promised you a long, long time ago, in 1975 to be precise, that I would never leave the Palestinian cause alone, and that's another promise that I have kept. And I think that it is important, though we are here to talk about a local election campaign, touching inevitably on national politics, to take a moment or two only to reflect on the current international situation, for it bears on national politics and therefore also on local politics, not least in terms of the money that we have to spend as a country to tackle in a practical way the problems being faced by so many of our people in this bleak midwinter. I've got to say, and I say it to the camera now, don't tell me that you support the Palestinian people if you are then going to tell people to vote for Keir Starmer's Labour Party. That is absolutely Keir Starmer's Labour Party is the most savagely pro-Israel centre-left political party in the entire world. They embarrass even their counterparts in Israel. They embarrass even the so-called Israeli Labour Party. They are the Likud, they are the Netanyahu of the centre-left political world. Israeli journalists, in particular Gideon Levy, a frequent guest of mine on my show, from the Haaretz newspaper, would be expelled from Keir Starmer's Labour Party every day of the week for the things that he writes in the Israeli press. Tony Benn would be expelled every day of the week. That's why Chris Williamson is ex-Labour MP, and that's why tens of thousands of people have either left Keir Starmer's Labour Party or actually been suspended from it or expelled from it. So if you're watching this and you consider yourself a supporter of justice in Palestine, if you tremble with indignation at the diggers and bulldozers that are this very day destroying Palestinian homes in Jerusalem, internationally recognized as occupied territory, destroying homes in occupied territory being a crime under international law, fully supported by Keir Starmer and his so-called misnamed Labour Party, then frankly you have a choice to make, and it's long past the time for you to make it. If you tremble with indignation at what has happened to the Palestinian people, then it's time to tear up Keir Starmer's Labour membership card now and do something useful instead. Or else you can be a hypocrite, you see. Or else you can be a hypocrite. You can wear your Palestinian badge, and then it comes to an election and you ask people to vote for Keir Starmer's Labour Party. That's hypocrisy. If you're content to be a hypocrite, then stay there. Stay there and fight. What are they talking about? Fight. If you did fight, you'd be kicked out. So the truth is, you're not fighting. You're lying dormant under the permafrost, hoping that like a woolly mammoth, one day you'll be able to stagger to your feet. It's preposterous nonsense, and in your heart you already know it. But the main feature of the international situation that I want to touch on is even more serious than that. I've lived a long life. I hope to live longer. But I've been in politics for more than 50 years, 36 years in the Labour Party, almost 30 years in the House of Commons. There has never been a more dangerous moment since the end of the Cold War, and there's never been a more dangerous moment, in my opinion, it's a controversial opinion, since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1961 than the one that we are living in now. The fact that what I've just said comes as a surprise to you is because the mass media on which so many people rely are deliberately concealing that fact from you. We currently, this country where there are 5 million children living in poverty, where the litany of misery adumbrated by Lauren and by Reuben at the beginning of this meeting in the second city of our rich country. We are currently sailing aircraft carriers, battleships, destroyers, fielding nuclear-capable aircraft and sending soldiers to the border of not one, but 2 nuclear-armed superpowers, challenging them to a fight. Are these people insane? Both China and Russia, never mind the 2 of them together, could turn this entire country into ash, into toast, in an hour of an afternoon. And we're parking our tanks, our airplanes, our warships on their frontier and calling them a threat to peace. I mean, there's something maniacal about this. You send your army to their border and then accuse them of being a threat to peace. Anybody who believes that is an idiot. Unfortunately, we have idiots in our midst. Most of them in the House of Commons, for a start. Most of them broadcasting on the television, for a start. Most of them writing in our newspapers, for a start. But we have them also amongst our public. I'm sorry to say that. I see it on social media. I hear it in the street. Oh, China, what are we going to do about China? What are you going to do about China? Find a house for that guy lying by the side of the road first before you start lecturing China. Find a job for the millions that are unemployed or underemployed. Find a decent school. Cut the waiting lists in your NHS. Find beds for people that are lying on trolleys or can't even get into the A&E this evening before you start thinking about China. Whereas Chris Williamson said, whatever else you think about them, they've lifted 800 million people out of poverty in the last 30 years. How many have we lifted out of poverty in the last 30 years? We've put millions into poverty over the last 30 years. So keep this in mind. If we've got money to burn, setting fire to other people's countries, we've got money to keep our old age pensioners warm through this bitter winter, this year and every other year. The money we're wasting on weapons and war is money that's being taken out of the pockets of the taxpayers in Britain and spent not on the needs of the people in Britain, but on threatening and confronting other people whose business is nothing to do with us. I could speak to you all night about the Crimea, about Taiwan. Trust me, I could. And I'd persuade you. But that's not why I'm here. And in any case, it's not our business what happens in the Crimea or in Taiwan. We have more than enough business to attend to here in our own country. We love this country. That's a difference between us and many on the so-called left. They're never done rubbishing this country. They call it a septic isle and all these other insults. They wanted us to remain under the rule of unelected bureaucrats in Brussels. We believe in British sovereignty and independence. Not because that's enough in itself. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. It's not sufficient, but it is necessary. We now have the possibility in our country to strike an independent course that can resolve these miserable problems that my comrades in Birmingham have been describing this evening. And we must take it. You see, Lauren, you asked the rhetorical question earlier. Does this sound like the policies of a Labour Party standing up for the working class? And of course, the answer to your rhetorical question was no. But it isn't just that Labour doesn't stand up for the working class, it's that it pretends to. That's the real rub. I'm going to speak mainly about Labour this evening. Not because I support the Tories. We expect the Tories to be pocket-picking, champagne-swilling, corrupt, dastardly elements. We expect that. That's what they are. A scorpion stings because it is a scorpion. The Tories are scorpions. That's why they sting. Our problem is with the wolf in sheep's clothing. That is the so-called Labour Party. And that's why I'm going to concentrate my fire on them this evening. Last time I was in Birmingham, I went to Smethwick. I stood in the street, under the street sign, where the great Malcolm X walked and stood just weeks, I think, before he was murdered. It now turns out by the intelligence services of the United States. He talked about this wolf in sheep's clothing, the man who poses as a liberal, as opposed to the man who is open about his attitudes towards you. He preferred them, so do I, to the wolf in sheep's clothing, because the wolf in sheep's clothing has a purpose: to divert you along with as many sheep as he can lead in entirely the wrong direction. We say that a Labour Council that cannot give its children a free ride on the bus and would rather send them to court in order to get to school, a Labour Council that is sitting on £500 million in reserves when its tenants are living in the conditions that Reuben explained so powerfully, is not a Labour Council at all. It's only pretending to be a Labour Council. And it must be beaten. It must be driven out of power. Now, we are not pretending that after just 2 years we can take control of the Birmingham City Council. We are saying if you give us your votes and your active support, we can elect a raft of people in there that will be making the case that we are making here. And if that case is made, then we will become stronger and stronger at the expense of the wolf in sheep's clothing. And finally, we will drive that wolf away. That's our task. Not just here in Birmingham, but everywhere in the country. We believe that the 100 years, it's actually more than 100 years now, that the Labour Party has existed is long enough to conclude not only that they are not capable, but they have no intention of transforming our country in the way that the mass of our people need. We don't ask for much. Reuben laid it out. We say everybody has the right to a decent and decently paid unionized job. What's wrong with that? Who's got an argument against that? And that everyone needs to work, by the way. We're not a party of shirkers or lead swingers. Everyone needs to work. But they need to be able to get a decent and decently paid and trade unionized job. Everybody has the right to a clean environment. All these hypocrites that flew in their private jets to Glasgow just a month or so ago with their 27-car cavalcades of gigantic limousines. That's all they talked about, wasn't it? A decent, clean environment. I'm in favour of it. But let's start with rat-infested council houses in Birmingham. Let's start with cockroach-infested buildings in Birmingham. It's not that we're poor, we could do it. Birmingham Council could do it. They could take a small piece of their £500 million reserve and wipe out every rat and every cockroach in this city. Easily. Easily. It's not that they can't do it, it's that they won't do it because they don't believe that their own tenants are worthy of that expenditure. Well, you know, if you let people take you for granted, they'll take you for granted. If they think you're going to vote Labour anyway, why should they change? If you're a glutton for punishment, why shouldn't they continue to punish you? But if, as Chris Williamson said, you're going to stand up and say, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore, that's when things will begin to change. And that's what I have driven 5 hours to be here this evening, and will drive 5 hours back at the end of this meeting to say to you, not to entertain you, though I hope that the meeting has been entertaining. Not so you can buy one of my books, although I hope you will. I came here to make you angry, because nothing will be achieved until our people get angry. I think they are actually increasingly angry, but in an unformed way, and sometimes against the wrong targets. We want our people to be righteously angry, because only righteous anger in the face of all these problems can change the situation fundamentally. It's not that getting one Workers' Party councillor in Birmingham, or 5 or 10, will change the world. It won't. But it will be a step in the right direction. And I hope that you'll take that step in May 2022. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, George, and I don't really like following you, so I'm going to be as quick as possible. The final item on tonight's agenda is to meet the candidates for the Workers' Party for Birmingham in May 2022. George, do you mind standing down
Sure.
front so we can all have a nice photo with you? And I hope as well, George, that we can get you back sometime before the May election to
Sure. I'll be
give
here.
us some of
I'll be
your
here
campaigning
plenty, yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
So, if you wouldn't mind coming to the front and having a photo taken, Paul Scrivens, who will be standing for Balsall Heath West. Come on, Paul. Ruben Lawrence, who will be standing for Bordsley Green. Edward Renyard, who will be standing in Highgate and Bordsley.
Highgate.
Highgate and Bordsley, which is, Highgate is where we're currently standing right now, is it? Yeah. I mean, we're in Highgate, but I think the ward, like, Eugene Egan, who will be standing for Alum Rock. Tom O'Neill, who will be standing for Sparkbrook and Balsall Heath East. Thank you, Tom. Also in Sparkbrook and Balsall Heath East is Catherine Kramer, but I think she's
left.
She's left. Newborn baby and all that.
We can forgive that.
And lastly, Dr. Phil Bevan, who will be standing for Brandwood and Kings Heath.
Bravo.
Come on, Phil.
There's a doctor in the house.
And I myself will also be standing in Brandwood and Kings Heath with.
Wow.
Now, before you all run off, just across the street at our headquarters, we will be having beer and other sort of drinks after this. You're all welcome to come along, have a drink, and speak with your local candidate. I just want to thank everyone again for coming this evening. It's been a real joy to see so many new faces in the crowd. Thanks again for George for coming all the way down, such a long way, and for Chris for coming down from Derby as well. You will see a couple of buckets going around the room. We are asking for a collection if anyone carries cash these days. To support our campaign for council. So please, if you can, give generously. And thank you to Chris from the Birmingham Theatre Company for allowing us to use this room. Such a beautiful building, and yeah, we're really happy to help this continue. And that's it. So thank you all for coming, and we'll see you on the campaign trail.